These studies aren't definitive. They're not, you come out with one study that shows, oh, we found that, 10 sets was the maximum hypertrophy stimulus that was needed to grow muscle. I'm like, in who? Because what I need for a stimulus is probably different. What you need to grow muscle is probably different what he needs for a stimulus to grow muscle. So this is the answer for everyone? 10 sets is the maximum that you need to do in a workout to build muscle? I don't think. It's, we just don't have those answers yet.
Welcome to this month's Escape Your Limits podcast. Today's guest is a renowned authority in exercise science and sports nutrition. With a doctorate in exercise physiology and biochemistry, he began his career with groundbreaking research at Yale University School of Medicine, where he studied how exercise and diet influence gene regulation in muscle, served as a senior science editor for Muscle and Fitness, and built a powerful following with his popular training programs. He's also the founder of JYM Supplement Science and has served as a personal nutrition and health consultant to icons like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, LL Cool J, Dr. Dre, and Mario Lopez.
When you hit failure, you're not coming back up. It appears that stretch, having that muscle under a stretch, is important for hypertrophy. They've recently concluded, I guess, or suggesting that the people who do extreme exercise aren't the healthiest. We really don't know how a muscle grows at the end of the day.
So please join me in welcoming back Dr. Jim Stoppani to this month's Escape Your Limits podcast.
Well, Jim, thanks for inviting me back down to your fantastic studio.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Always a pleasure to have you.
It's been 5 years since we did it.
Wow.
Just before the pandemic.
Yeah, oh, right. Yeah, it doesn't seem that long, does it?
No.
5 years, wow. Well, you look like you haven't aged at all. So.
Thank you. We were talking before, it's all of those supplements I'm taking of yours now. It must be working.
Exactly.
I was wondering, within that time, there's a lot of research in the field. One of the things that we spoke about on the last podcast was the fact that in the strength world, there was very little research, probably because there wasn't any motivation to fund that kind of research. So not a huge amount really known compared to other areas of I guess, research and biology. But certainly I hear there's a lot of things that are being discovered recently. So what would you say within, let's say, the last 5 years have been some significant changes in your knowledge and ways, and also information that you're using that you've had to potentially evolve based on some of the new information that's out there?
Yeah, the nice thing is that there is more research coming out. When we talked 5 years ago, we had to pick from studies on, muscle dystrophy, and try to find answers for how muscle grows and whatnot through, disease states and things like that. Because there's just not a lot of people who have money going, hey, let's see how a bicep gets bigger. You know what I mean? Maybe stronger, faster, because professional athletes need to be faster and stronger. But few athletes need to be bigger other than bodybuilders. And bodybuilding is not a sport where you're making, a ton of money. I think the Mr. Olympia prize is $600,000. So for a bodybuilder compared to, say, an NFL player who's making mega millions a year, there's just not a lot of money. And so, like I said, a lot of the research is done in either, medical, trying to solve medical issues. And then we try to tweeze out some of the things that we've learned there, or in athletes who are strength and power athletes. But as far as muscle growth goes, there is, very little research, relatively speaking. However, now with the boom in social media, when you were here last 5 years ago, there were not that many people doing, what I do, teaching people through social media and YouTube and online on how to exercise. Now there's millions and millions and millions of fitness influencers, right? So then there's good and bad about that. There's a lot of bad information, but it's sort of normalized hypertrophy and muscle growth. And in fact, some of these influencers, Jeff Nippert is one, I don't know if you know that name, are actually funding some of this research now. And so we're starting to see more research come out that's hypertrophy based. So some of the things that I would say that I've changed my mind is what part of the range of motion in an exercise is the most critical? And that's one of the things that several studies have come out now looking at. If we look at the range of motion, let's just take a curl, right? From a straight arm to as flexed as you can flex it, right? Full range of motion. Now, where along that range of motion would you say is the most critical part for muscle growth? Joe Weider said it was the peak contraction, the last, sort of that last half, right? You really needed to focus on that last half. And a lot of bodybuilders would agree. That's really what you want to focus on, is that peak contraction. However, there's research now where they take an exercise like the biceps curl, right? And they break up the range of motion, either doing just the initial half, the first half, right? Or just the last half, which would be that peak contraction I'm talking about, or the full range of motion. And the results are, what they're showing is, at least in beginners, that the initial range of motion is probably more critical than the last half, that peak contraction range of motion. So what we see in beginners, and there was a study done on calf training where they were doing calf, toe raises. The group that only did the initial half of the range of motion grew their calves about 2 to 3 times more than the groups that were doing just the last half of the range of motion and the full range of motion. Now, that was in beginners, right? So non-trained people. There was another recent study in trained individuals where they had them do a workout like that with one arm, either doing the initial half, right? Or the final half, or then they had a full range of motion. And what they found was that the initial half of the range of motion grew muscle just as well as the full range of motion, meaning you may not even need to do a full range of motion to build muscle. We're talking about hypertrophy, right? And so what's interesting is it's showing now that the stretch component and the muscle being loaded while it's under stretch probably is, whether we can say it's the most critical aspect of the range of motion for hypertrophy, we know it's at least important. And what's interesting is there's a study where they just stretched the muscle under load. They didn't even move. They just held the load. I can't remember how long it was, but it was fairly long. I think even 15 to 20 minutes holding this load. So not comfortable, but the muscle grew, just holding weight in a stretched position. And then what's also interesting is, I competed as a bodybuilder back in the late 80s and early 90s. And whenever we were training, in between, when we were resting, we didn't just sit down. We were stretching the muscle that we were training.
Yeah, Frank Zane used to be one.
Yes, do you remember?
Yeah.
Remember? A lot of guys talked about the importance of stretching. Now, one of the theories was that stretching was stretching the myofascia, that like casing around to allow the muscle. That was sort of which we know is not really the answer, but it appears that stretch, having that muscle under a stretch, is important for hypertrophy.
And what do you think? Like, I can sort of see now a lot of people thinking that, changing the way they're training and incorporating that into it. Like, are there any sort of, so taking that idea and applying
Yes.
it, are there any sort of do's and don'ts? Because my guess is if you just focus on that end range, there could be other consequences that it creates potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So what when you take that information, what would be sort of like a rule of thumb about considering how you would apply that into a workout?
Yeah. So how I would apply it into a workout is that I would do the first exercise first. So let's say you're doing a chest workout, and let's say it's 3 sets. Let's just do typical chest workout. 3 sets of the bench press, 3 sets of incline presses, 3 sets of flies, 3 sets of crossovers. Let's say that's your workout, right? When you get to the bench press, I would probably stick on pressing exercise like the bench press. I would probably do all half reps for the bench press, because here we're not just talking about the stretch. We're talking about range of motion of a muscle group versus an exercise. So if you were a power lifter, you have to complete a full range of motion on the bench press, right? The arms have to be fully extended at the top. However, the bench press doesn't just work the chest, right? It works the shoulders and the triceps. The shoulders and the triceps are more involved on the bench press in the last half of the range of motion. The chest is more involved in the first half. So I would stick with the bench press, but again, this is just one exercise that we're talking about here very specifically, that I would stick to all half reps because again, it's minimizing the use of the shoulders and the triceps, keeping the focus on the chest while keeping it in the stretch position, right? However, if we were doing arms, say, the biceps, right, on that first exercise, I would not do all sets for half reps. This is, and sorry to get a little confusing here, but I would just do one set of half reps, okay? The very first one while you're strongest, okay? Why? Some experts have recommended, if you want to try this long length partial thing, to do the last set as your half rep. And I say that's wrong because the other benefit of the half rep is that it allows you to lose more weight. Okay. So for example, on the bench press, if you were going all the way up, right? Most people are weaker in the shoulders and the triceps and the chest. So the amount of weight that they can lift with the triceps and the shoulders is less than the chest. So if they were doing a full range of motion where their arms are fully extended at the top and they were doing, let's say, 8 to 10 reps, they would use far less weight than if they were just staying in that bottom half. So it's allowing you to overload that muscle while it's in a stretch position. So my line of thinking is if it's allowing you to overload that muscle in the stretch position, do those half reps when you're at your strongest, not at the end of the set, right? At the end of the 3 sets, when you're at your weakest and already fatigued. You want to really overload that muscle. And that may, we really don't know why the long length partials work so well, whether it's the stretch in particular, or maybe it's just the fact that you can use more weight and you're really placing more overload on that muscle. But so what I would do is for most muscle groups, except for, like I said, chest, when talking about presses, I would do the first set as a half rep and then finish the last 2 as full reps. Right. And then on the very last set, when you can no longer complete any more full reps, continue doing reps, whatever the range of motion, until you literally can't move the weight.
The wait is over. Our new Escape Fitness catalog has landed. This is the essential guide to all of the latest product innovations that are shaping the future of functional training. Bigger and better than ever, this year's catalog is 190 pages, jam-packed with everything from eye-catching, bespoke functional training frames to some of the latest strength training equipment. So sign up today to receive the digital version today. So what are you waiting for? Go to escapefitness.com now.
How would you apply that to legs then? Where would you sort of do that? And what piece of equipment would you best place to do it?
So it can get tricky because if you're doing squats and you're only using the bottom half of the range of motion, right? Well, when you hit failure, you're not coming back up.
No.
So I would use a squat rack with a safety bar, right?
Belt squat? What about belt squat?
A belt squat would work. Smith machine can help. Even having a spotter is not going to really help you because once you fail on squats, he's not helping. You know what I mean? A spotter can help you minimally on squats, but once you've hit failure in the bottom position, he's not going to pull you back up to be able to rack that bar. So that's why I would use those safeties, and then you just bottom out on the squat rack. But again, Smith machine, belt squats, leg press, obviously is one.
So you'd start on the legs. Then you would start with the bottom part of the movement. Then first
I do my first set while you're at your strongest, so that you can really overload in that bottom position.
Right.
Finish that set, then reduce the weight to whatever you can do for that rep range for full reps.
Right.
And then in the very last set, I would continue doing my reps until I couldn't go anymore.
And then you just sort of basically pulse at the bottom of the range.
Exactly.
More or less. Okay.
The pulse.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about the pulse reps is that there's guys like Flex Lewis. I don't know if you know who he is. He's the 212 Mr. Olympia champ. He no longer competes, but he would swear by doing pulse reps for his calves as well as stretching in between and after he did calves. He was always about the pulse reps and always about the stretching, and his calves are
Yeah, we had him
unbelievable.
on. We were in Vegas a little while ago, actually.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Did you go to Dragon's Lair?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, he's doing some great stuff over there. So, and what about then, does that link into time under tension? Like, for example, when you're doing those, are you focusing just on regular reps, rep count, or are you trying to slow
I
down on
would,
the
yeah,
eccentric?
that's a good question. And, I think like with the bench press, for example, right? And we're talking about keeping it in that little lower range, right? It's keeping it on the chest. It's keeping that time under tension on the chest. Because when you're doing the full bench press, like a power lifter, right? At the top, now you're really not using your pecs. So now there's not time under tension in the pecs. So you're losing time under tension with a full, whereas the half reps are keeping that time under tension on the pecs, right?
Yeah.
For that exercise, okay? But what I would do is I would focus more, instead of doing, and you'll see this, where it's more of a bounce, like those pull straps we were talking about. That's fine when you're fatigued, but when you're starting the rep count, instead of just doing these pull straps, I would come down into the stretch and hold it for a bit, and then go into the positive part, right? And then back down, and instead of just down and back up, down, right?
Yeah.
I would come down and hold it and really get that stretch before I went into the positive.
So in some ways, then, and I've read that there is something else that happens when your muscle is in the stretch. I can't remember what it was. It was a while ago since I looked at this, but I heard there's something to do when you're in the stretch position. But the other thing that you've said is, my guess is, when you're in that stretch, is you are just loading the muscle a lot more than you would do if you kind of did like 3 regular sets, I suppose.
Right.
If you could time it, my guess is that there's just a large percentage more of that tension being put on the muscle, which you would have thought helps to stimulate.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we can sort of equate
Piece
to why
together.
that seems to be working to
Right.
help build muscle.
Interesting. One of the things I read, there was some recent research that's developed models to predict the optimal amount of exertion needed to maximize muscle growth, some sort of mathematical models. Have you seen
Yeah.
anything about that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and so, there's a lot of research coming out now that we talked about, right? But here's the thing. As a real scientist, as somebody who's literally been in the lab with pipettes doing research, there's a lot of experts out there who've never actually done research, never had to get a grant, don't really understand. They read a research paper and they think this is the holy grail, whereas I read a research paper and I'm like, well, that workout really wasn't a workout. They, you can poke all these holes in a research study. The problem with the amount of research that's coming out now and the amount of fitness influencers out there is that they're going like long length partials. They're going, this is how you grow muscle. And it's like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There was a time when we realized that lower intensities of cardio burned more fat. And we had the fat burning zone. Remember this? Back in like the 80s, there was a fat burning zone. You wanted to stay at about 60 to 70% of your max heart rate because you burn more fat, right? This is similar to that. And we run with that. That's what you want to do. And then we're like, wait a minute. You're actually burning fewer calories by training at a lower intensity. And now we know, does it really matter what fuel you're burning during a workout to lose fat? If that's what it doesn't. So fast forward to 2024 and all this stuff about long length partials, junk volume. Have you heard that term?
No.
Junk volume. That's, you did 16 sets for chest. You probably could have got away with 8 because that would be the most volume that you needed to build muscle. And now everything else is just waste
Junk volume, right, okay.
of your time. And it's just like, really? Is it? You know what I mean? So the thing is these studies aren't definitive. They're not, you come out with one study that shows, we found that, 10 sets was the maximum hypertrophy stimulus that was needed to grow muscle. I'm like, in who? Because what I need for a stimulus is probably different. What you need to grow muscle is probably different what he needs for a stimulus to grow muscle. So this is the answer for everyone? 10 sets is the maximum that you need to do in a workout to build muscle? I don't think it's, we just don't have those answers yet. It's too, it's kind of like we talked about before with hypertrophy. You can kind of define how to build strength, right? How to build muscle endurance. But when it comes to hypertrophy, it's kind of all over the place. Like I said, and again, these guys are taking something else that helps with hypertrophy. But again, you have a Mr. Olympia, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who would do like 20 sets for chest, right? He won the Mr. Olympia, amazing physique. Then you have Dorian Yates, who would do 6 sets for chest, right? Now, again, different sets, but again, his volume was far lower than what Arnold's was, yet he won the Olympia and arguably was even bigger than Arnold. And again, you fast forward, it's more science, more knowledge of drugs. But again, how can 2 athletes, regardless of what they're both taking something, build so much muscle by going about it so differently, right? And so it's muscle hypertrophy is very confusing because it's really hard to say what works. You'll see studies going, well, we compared supersets to straight sets, and whichever one built more muscle, people go, aha, you see, that's the better workout. And it's like, well, no, because if a guy was doing supersets for the last 2 years, he'd probably build more muscle by not doing supersets and doing straight sets. However, if a guy was doing straight sets for 2 years, he'd probably build more muscle by switching to supersets for a while, right? And so you can't take these studies and just say that they're the definitive answer for everyone. Like, oh, you see, straight sets build more muscle. Then, you know what I mean? 10 sets is the total amount of volume. It's like, where is that person, along the training experience scale? What has their training been? You know what I mean? These are all factors that are going to affect what's going to work for them. So we really know little about muscle hypertrophy, and anybody who tells you any differently just doesn't understand the real science.
How do you go about your education? Because, and I've listened to a lot of your stuff, and I can, my thought is a lot of people can take what you say out of context, and also,
of course,
when you're obviously not talking to me, you're talking to lots of people, and so what you're saying, as you say, there could be so many different variables depending on who you are, how old you are, how you've trained, etc. So how do you stay fairly true and avoid getting wrapped up in all kinds of criticisms online by giving advice, but also knowing that there are so many variables and everybody's unique and individual?
I test it I test it on myself. I test it on the people that I work with. And that's what I say with the long length partials. The only way you're going to know if it works is to try it out yourself, because what works for me may not work for you. That's the other thing, as we're talking about, what worked for Arnold was completely different for what worked for Dorian. You know what I mean? So will long length partials be the magic tool for muscle building? Maybe, the study says, but until you try it yourself, right? And so I try all these things on myself. I try them on clients. I try them on the people that follow me in the gym army. And then we see how it works.
Do you know if there's any scientifically proven ideal amount of muscle for general health and performance for males, as an example? Or is it just, are we a long way away from sort of understanding what is optimal? Obviously, there's people that want to build muscle from an aesthetic perspective, but for general health and well-being, do we know what that is, and is there any way to sort of assess that at all, do you think?
Yes, it's 185 pounds. No, I'm kidding. For everyone. Yeah, that's interesting because they've recently concluded, I guess, or suggesting that the people who do extreme exercise aren't the healthiest. It's not the extreme, the guys who go run, 20 miles, the guys like me who train in the gym. We're not the ones that are going to live the longest, right? It's the moderate people that it seems, the moderate ones that are exercising, right, moderately, not to these extremes, right? And you can't be sedentary, you can't be too overactive, kind of like in moderation are the ones that, again, this is initial data that we're looking at. And so I would say, while there's no real answer on the muscle mass one, it would be somewhere in that moderate. It's not going to be Mr. Olympia style. We know what it takes to create a body with that much muscle, right? Which is not healthy in the long run. But even if somebody was natural, obviously there's, you know, our genetic differences. I've seen homeless people with 19-inch biceps. You know what I mean? Just doing nothing. Just that's their genetics. So obviously it's an individual thing, but I would say a moderate amount of muscle mass.
As you get older, we were talking earlier, getting into your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, where your testosterone is reducing, even though your father at 80 has got 1,000. It is an anomaly, but in most cases it decreases. Then you're gaining a lot more weight, putting on fat because you don't have the muscle there. How should somebody look at it as you get older as to, well, where do I want to get to? Because it's a very... you go to a trainer, you follow a program. It's like, well, what should I be aiming at, really, personally, without sort of necessarily looking to get, a six pack or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But for that, for that general health and longevity reason.
I mean, it's competing with yourself. It's, being better than what you were a month ago, or, I mean, obviously you can't keep breaking PRs or anything, but if you're a person who doesn't carry a lot of muscle mass, maybe carry some excess body fat like most people, you're not that strong, you don't have great endurance, right? Again, getting into that moderate range, increasing your strength, your lean muscle mass, decreasing your body fat, increasing your endurance is going to do wonders, regardless of how strong you get to be or how much muscle you gain, right? Relatively speaking to another person, it's the fact that you've gained muscle, you've gained strength, you've increased your endurance from where you were. And the thing with the sarcopenia, the muscle loss as we get older, a lot of people wonder, is it the loss of testosterone that comes as we age? Sure, that can be a factor, but even someone like me, I use Alpha Gym. My testosterone is around 1,000 as well, right? I'm able to maintain it, but despite training just as intensely as I always have trained at 56, I'm definitely losing muscle. Now, you wouldn't look at me and go, oh
No,
my God,
I'm not seeing that.
You lost all your muscle, right? But if you saw a photo of me from 10 years ago, you would say, yeah, you're...
Is that you on the wall behind there?
Yes.
Okay.
You'd definitely see, there's no way to prevent it, but it's limiting it. That's really what it's about, is limiting that muscle loss. When you're building muscle, there's two main ways that we think it happens. One is you break it down, you replace it, and then it grows bigger and stronger. The other is just by protein synthesis, and that's just taking amino acids, building them up, packaging them into your muscle protein, and then you have more protein. So the two, how you build muscle is, like I said, it's very, very questionable. Like you said, we don't really have an answer on which one is more critical, or if any of these things that we see are actually leading to building more muscle. Because when you increase muscle protein synthesis, have you heard of microRNAs? This is kind of a big thing now.
Yeah, I heard you talking about it, but
yeah. So microRNAs are now not just for muscle, but just for genetics in general are a big. In fact, I think the Nobel Prize were the guys that discovered the microRNAs recently. And again, not for muscle building, just for general genetics, the way that they work. And what microRNAs do is you have protein synthesis, which is basically, if you think about a pearl necklace, right? The amino acid is each individual pearl in that necklace, right? And that's, you build all these proteins up, literally like makes believe you were building a pearl necklace, right? Or a bead, right? You have beads. Each bead is an amino acid, and it goes on and goes on, right? And then you have this string of amino acids, right? That's your muscle protein, right? And then it'll get folded up into the shape that it needs to be. But before that long chain is going to go to make muscle, that microRNA may come and just literally destroy it all, so that that protein doesn't get produced. And like I said, the more important discovery is not with muscle growth, but the way we turn on and turn off other genes, right? With these microRNAs, but they're involved in muscle building or not muscle building. And so why would the body make this protein, spend all this energy building this protein when this other microRNA just is going to come in and destroy it? And so, like I'm saying, we can talk all day about satellite cells, Titan. We can talk about, different mechanisms, but we really don't know.
Mm.
We really don't know how a muscle grows at the end of the day.
And what do you take? So you've given a few examples there. Like what can a basic person like me, what can we take away? Because there's definitely some interesting stuff out there that we're learning that relates to it. But is there any things that are rising to the surface which says, okay, well this is relevant unless you're a doctor or a scientist, this is relevant to the general person, or is it still under the surface things that don't, it's nice to talk about them on a podcast, but they don't really have any relevance to training.
I mean, I would say that the advice I would give is make sure you're eating adequate protein, because you can't build that protein if you don't have it, right? And so what the general belief right now is it's somewhere around 0.7, right? 0.8, 0.9 grams per pound of muscle. I just rounded up to 1. So if you're 200 pounds, eat 200 grams of protein, right? You want to make sure you're getting adequate amount of protein, because those amino acids, particularly the essential amino acids that you can't build, have to come from your diet. So if you're low in those essential amino acids, particularly leucine, right, which we talked about with mTOR, you're not going to be able to build muscle if you don't have adequate amount. So make sure you're eating at least, like I said, your body weight in grams of protein.
Okay. Whilst you're on protein, and I'm going to skip down because I've got a couple of questions on it. The first one really is there's a number of different proteins. I take your version, but you read online that there's whey, there's isolate, there's now these beef proteins that I've been looking at. What sort of general advice have you got if you're substituting protein with a supplement? What are things to focus on, and what are things to potentially ignore from the supplementation side?
So the first thing I'll say is on beef protein is not protein. I mean, it's protein, but it's not like the muscle. So when you get a jug of beef protein, it's not like they took a steak and freeze dried it and ground it up.
That's what it sounds like. It is.
So what it is it's the cartilage, it's the hooves, it's collagen. Beef protein should be, and this irritates me because there's no regulation on this one, that it should be listed as collagen protein. A lot of people think when they buy beef protein that it's literally the muscle that's being ground down into a powder. You're not getting the muscle. You're getting the collagen. You're getting the hooves.
Is that any good or not?
For muscle building? No, it's
Right,
terrible
okay.
because it's a different amino acid profile. It's high in amino acids that build the cartilage, the connective tissue, not the muscle. It's low in leucine, branched chain amino acids, essential amino acids that are critical for building muscle. So it's really misinformation that's out there, because you'll see the ad and it's a bodybuilder with a steak in his mouth. You know what I mean? Like, that's the ad that they used to run, is a raw steak in the bodybuilder's mouth. And it's like, with the beef protein jugs on each side of him, like, that's what's in the jugs. And it's collagen. And we know collagen is not effective for building muscle. It might help with your skin. It might help with your joints, right? But building muscle, it's not, because of the amino acid profile. So what I would recommend then, as long as you're not vegan, that you'd want a dairy-based protein, so milk-based protein, which provides whey protein and casein. Those are the two protein that are in milk, right? 20% whey, about 80% casein. And if you want to visualize this, it's when you open a yogurt, right? And you've got that liquid on top, that's your whey. Okay, if you pour that off, right, it's very liquidy, right? The leftover white is your casein protein. And they have different digestion rates. The whey is very fast digesting. I mean, you can see it's liquid, it's, and the casein is very thick, right? And the reason that it's so slow is because the structure that it forms when you mix it in fluid is called the micelle, which is basically like an onion. There's different layers of an onion, right? There's layers of the protein. And so to digest it, it has to digest the outside of that layer and then the next layer and then the next layer and then the next layer and the next layer. Whereas whey just gets broken down and digested almost immediately. And so those two digestion rates, we used to think that whey was the most critical, and it is the most critical form of the protein in milk because it's so fast, right? You drink it, it gets into your bloodstream within 30 minutes, and probably after 2 hours, it's now out of your bloodstream. Okay. That's almost too quick, though, because what happens is you drink that, it spikes muscle protein synthesis that we talked about, right? Which is building those amino acids, but then it just drops right off. Casein, on the other hand, because it's so slow digestion, you get that rise in muscle protein synthesis, but it doesn't drop right off because it's continually being digested in your GI tract, right? And so it's like a slow trickle providing amino acids to the bloodstream. So it maintains muscle protein synthesis for longer. So can that lead to more muscle? Yes. Does a normal person need to worry about that? Probably not. Does somebody who wants to, maximize how big their biceps are, they're worried about gaining just a quarter of an inch, a half inch, yeah, that can help, So again, it depends on your, what your goals are, like the anabolic window, right? Like I make a pre-workout, I make a post-workout, right? I recommend getting protein before you work out, protein immediately after you work out. Now there's a theory that is it really that critical that you eat right after you work out, right? And the research shows that at least in beginners, if they don't eat right after their workout and they eat up to 24 hours later, they'll still get the same spike in muscle protein synthesis. Okay. However, if you train that group, and this was done in a research study, that window of how big it'll spike is now shortened from 24 hours to, again, these aren't exact times, to like 16, 12 hours. It's shorter. So what about somebody if that was 8 weeks of training, it shortened that window. How much would 8 years of training shorten the window? We really don't know, right? And so but what a lot of people think the research is saying is you don't bother eating after you work out. It doesn't matter. And I would say, sure, to the guy with the dad bod who just wants to be healthier, maybe have some more muscle, lose some body fat, it doesn't matter. But to the guy who wants to add an extra half inch to his biceps, yeah, I would say you probably want to eat right after you work out, at least get some protein. And again, you can argue about that anabolic window, how long, but why would you want, do you feel better after you eat after you've had an intense workout? Right? You feel better when you get some fuel, right? So why would you want to prolong that? You know what I mean? Plus, we talked about that spike in muscle protein synthesis. Each time you eat a protein-rich meal, right, at least 30 to 40 grams of protein, depending on your age, you get a spike in muscle protein synthesis, which should help build muscle. If you don't eat for, let's say, 12 hours after you work out, right, you've got no spike in muscle protein synthesis till this 12 hours. However, if I ate immediately after I worked out, I would get a spike here. Then I ate 3 hours later, I'd get another spike in muscle protein synthesis. If I ate then another 3 hours. So now by not eating and waiting 12 hours to eat after my workout, I've missed all those potential spikes that I could have gotten in muscle protein synthesis. You just get one way at the end here. Which one do you think would build muscle better? Probably, again, we really don't have all the answers yet, but I'm going to say it's probably the one where you're getting more spikes in muscle protein synthesis. So the anabolic window, is it critical? I think for somebody who's trying to maximize muscle, right? I don't know a bodybuilder alive who would ever end a workout and not eat within, an hour of the workout. You just feel better. But anecdotally, it seems to build muscle better. And again, like I said, because you're getting more spikes in that muscle protein synthesis. And then the type of protein. Does it really matter for the average guy? Probably not. As long as you're not eating beef protein, because as long as you're getting a dairy-based.
What about if you've got like lactose intolerant?
So if you're lactose intolerant, and I'm not trying to promote my supplement line, but we remove almost all. There's literally milligrams of lactose in a scoop of ProGym, not grams. So less than 1 gram of lactose. Even the most lactose sensitive person has no issues with ProGym. So find a protein powder that doesn't use whey protein concentrate,
Right.
which is hard to do. Okay. And the difference between whey protein concentrate and whey protein isolate is the amount of lactose, right? Concentrate is only about 80% protein, maybe even less. 50 to 80% is a concentrate. And isolate is around 90, 93% protein, right? So it's removing more of the other stuff that's in milk because it goes through more filtering. And so the isolate, you end up with almost no lactose. However, a lot of whey proteins use whey protein concentrate. And they'll often use both, right? Because the concentrate's cheaper, right? When you buy protein, you're paying for the protein, right? So if it's 80% protein or 90% protein, which one is going to cost more? The 90% protein, right? So a lot of supplement companies use the whey protein concentrate because it's cheaper, right? They can make more profit or charge less, right? However, for the person who's lactose intolerant or sensitive, that's a problem for them. And that's why a lot of people think that they can't do whey protein. And it ends up, no, you can't do whey protein concentrate because of the lactose. Once you get a whey protein isolate that doesn't have any lactose, a true isolate, they're fine. However, let's say they're extreme lactose intolerant, or for moral, religious, whatever the reason is, they don't want to do animal proteins, then I would do a plant-based protein. However, the problem with the plant-based is that it lacks those essential amino acids that we talked about. So you need to do a fortified plant-based protein that has more of the essential amino acids added to it. And that's what we have, a plant protein that I make that I add in their plant-based amino acids. I add more leucine, methionine, the essential amino acids, so that the amino acid profile is very similar to dairy, but you're not eating an animal protein.
I was taking your isolate for a while, and I think the guy I met who worked for you sort of said you mix it with water, and it was I guess it was easier to get down if I had a regular one, like maybe after workout, I'd sort of have that. Like what?
Yeah, so you're talking about the ProGym versus the IsoGym, right?
Right.
So the ProGym is a blend of whey and casein. The isolate is pure whey. And again, we talked about that yogurt, right? The whey is that clear. So the whey would be much lighter. You know what I mean? The casein, like yogurt, clumpy, it takes longer to digest. You're going to feel fuller. So that's the difference.
And the time or reason that you would take that, is that if you're trying to get a lot of protein in and you just can't fit anything else in, or is there any other reasons that you would take one over the other or take them together?
So, well, like I said, when we talked about whey protein, we used to think that was the magic protein because it's so fast. It's digested so fast. And so even scientists were saying that's the one you want to take, especially around workouts. It gets to your muscles faster. But what we found is that casein, like I said, because it's slow digesting, it keeps that muscle protein synthesis turned on. While the whey spikes it right away, the casein keeps it elevated because it's still being digested, still getting into your bloodstream. So that's why I make a blend of whey isolate and the casein so that you're getting both the fast and the slow. And so a lot of people think that they only need the fast, which is it's fine. It's going to spike protein synthesis. It's a short-lived spike, sure, but again, for the average person, does it critical how long their muscle protein synthesis stays turned on? Probably not. At the end of the day, to the guy who wants to put that extra half inch, that's probably going to matter. So again, depending on your goals, just get a quality protein powder, a whey isolate or a blend. If you're lactose sensitive, make sure that it doesn't use concentrate. Don't use beef protein unless you're looking for collagen for your skin and your connective tissue, but mainly a dairy-based protein. Unless you're vegan for whatever reason, then go with a plant-based, but hopefully get something that's fortified with the essential amino acids that most plant proteins don't have. Or you take more.
Right.
There was a study done where they compared plant to like a whey, and the plant wasn't as effective as the whey at the same dose. But if they doubled the dose or increased the dose of the plant, then it increased spiked muscle protein synthesis just as well as whey. It just takes more.
Right. Have you got any general guidelines about the timing? And depending on when you work out. So like I, for example, work out in the evening. Some people work out in the morning. Like, how do you time your protein around the workouts for sort of optimal results from, if you want to build strength and muscle, for example?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's your workout. That's your window. And, that's one of the reasons why I have that gym system where you have your pre-workout, you take your protein before, and then you have your post-workout and you take your protein after, because my thinking is, what time of day are you going to be thinking about taking supplements? When you're sitting at your office, when you're sitting at home in the living room watching, or when you're, around your workouts, And so I sort of like to pair those two things. It's, well, what's the word I'm looking for? But doing it at that time sort of, sets your day. You don't miss your, like creatine. You could argue whether you can take it after workouts or before you go to bed. Now there was one study done where they did that, and the guys who took it around workouts built more muscle than the guys who took it at like morning and night. But now some of the new research is saying it doesn't really matter. It still gets into the muscle and builds muscle. But I'm still recommending around workouts, simply for the fact that what time of day are you going to be thinking about taking creatine? You know what I mean? Before bed, when you wake up in the morning, when you're sitting at your office, you know what I mean? When you're commuting to work, no, you're going to be thinking about it when you're getting ready to go to the gym or after you've worked out. So that's one of the more critical reasons why I'm still a big believer on doing this workout nutrition, right? So I recommend getting a protein, usually a protein drink, just because it's easier to digest, right? Before you work out, and then getting a protein shake after you work out.
You said protein drink and shake. Do you mean the same thing?
Yeah, I mean the protein shake.
Right.
Or drink, right?
Yeah.
Same thing, right? Before and after, okay?
Right.
About 20 to 40 grams before, 40 or so after. I also recommend getting creatine before and after, beta-alanine before. Again, if your goal is to truly maximize your performance in the gym and the results that you get, right? Could you take those at any other time of day? Sure.
So with you mentioned creatine, like I take, and I'm not using this as a sort of plug for your products, but it helps me to understand and explain it. So I take your pre-gym. I think it's a great pre-workout. That's got creatine in it, hasn't it? Does that have enough? So if I just take that before my workout, is based on the recommendations, is that going to give me enough creatine if I want to, I'm maintaining muscle mass, I want to, keep my strength? Is that going to be enough, or would you have an additional supplement of creatine in my regular day?
Great question. And the answer is yes and no. So the creatine that I use in pre-gym is creatine hydrochloride. Now, all that is basically creatine monohydrate with hydrochloric acid. Why is there hydrochloric acid? Because if you take a scoop of creatine monohydrate and put it in a glass of water and then stir it, okay, a clear glass of water, you will see it takes a very, very long time to go into solution. It'll just sit in that bottom, okay? If you drank that while it's still sitting there like that with all that precipitate sitting in the bottom, it's going to go into your intestines. Creatine draws water, okay? If the creatine you're consuming, this is why dry scooping is a terrible idea with creatine monohydrate, right? If those creatine crystals are sitting in your intestines, they're going to draw water into your intestines, and that gives you explosive diarrhea.
Interesting.
So you want creatine monohydrate to go into solution so that it's pulled water, right? It's in solution. Now, when that solution is in your intestines, it won't be pulling any more water in, right? But if it hasn't gone into solution, it's going to be pulling more water in, okay? That not only causes explosive diarrhea, it limits the amount of creatine that you can absorb. I use creatine hydrochloride. You put that in a glass, immediately goes in the solution because it's changed. The pH is different, okay? It's more acidic. You don't even have to mix it. You put it in water, it literally goes in the solution. So you have less for people who have stomach issues. I'm very sensitive to creatine monohydrate. That's why I use the hydrochloride. It doesn't cause stomach issues like creatine monohydrate can, but you're also absorbing more of it. And one of the studies that was put out showed it was absorbed by the intestines about 60% better than creatine monohydrate, meaning you need less, okay? So in pre-gym, long way of saying, there's 2 grams of creatine hydrochloride. A lot of people think that's underdosed because if it was monohydrate, you would need at least 4 grams for it to be effective, 4 to 5 grams. So when people see 2 grams, in mine, they're like, oh, that pre-gym is underdosed. No, it's hydrochloride. That would be enough. However, I also have 2 grams in post-gym so that you're getting 4 grams total, right? You take 2 before, 2 after. And again, you could do 4 before, 4 after, right? If you wanted to. But even the 2 grams of creatine hydrochloride is going to be enough because with creatine, it's not effective until the muscle reaches the saturation point. You have to get enough creatine in there, right? Until it reaches that threshold, you're not going to build any more strength, right? So the more creatine you take, right, the higher. If you're doing 20 grams a day, like you've heard of loading phases, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I remember years ago.
You don't need to load any creatine, but if you do, it just reaches saturation faster, so you start getting results faster.
Mm-hmm.
So even with 2 grams of the hydrochloride, eventually you're going to reach saturation, right? And then you're going to start. So even if you did this 2 grams of the hydrochloride, you'd be fine. I would still recommend getting about 4.
Mm-hmm. And
right?
and would you have to do that daily, or could you do that like, however on the days that you work out, 4 or 5 times?
Yeah, and just do 2 on the days you don't work out.
Okay, you would take it.
But I would recommend taking creatine on days you don't work out.
Okay.
Because what we're now seeing is, right, creatine is not only about muscle building, right? It may help reduce the risk of cancer, increase longevity, brain health. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Coming up next.
There's steroids that are more anabolic and there's steroids that are more androgenic, right? The anabolic is going to give you the muscle building, right?
Right.
Fat loss. The androgenic is going to give you sex drive, anger, male pattern baldness. I love intermittent fasting. In fact, I do a bit of intermittent fasting, modified. Alcohol is just horrible as you get older. it just ruins your, sleep quality.
What about for weight loss? Can creatine aid in weight loss? Is it mainly?
I mean, I would say no. It's not going to be a direct fat loss. But you could argue if it's allowing you to be more athletic, being stronger, have more endurance, you're going to do more work, you're going to burn more calories. That may help you. But as a fat loss agent, I would say no.
Right. I heard a statement you said, which is quite interesting, and I thought it's an interesting sort of line to go down. But you sort of said that you can't maintain a new body in an old life, and that the lifestyle changes are crucial to any kind of, this one was specifically for weight loss, but it kind of made me think, everything life, whether you're trying to build muscle, get into an exercise program, or even, change a habit, do something with your business. It was an interesting one because I think in a lot of cases we sort of focus on the program or the idea.
Yeah, right. All the specifics of that.
But we kind of forget the other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I just sort of interested in, like how you apply that to your own life or how you apply that when you're coaching other people because it's a small thing, but it's a big thing at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to have, even a support system is critical, having somebody who's positive, I was lucky enough to grow up with parents who were very, they exercised and they taught me the importance of exercise. And when I exercised, I was, I wasn't ridiculed. I was, they celebrated me working out. A lot of people who've grown up, their parents were like, wow, why are you wasting all that time? You know what I mean? Like, and they think it's selfish. So you can have, a wife or, a significant other who doesn't support your willingness to change, right? In fact, they may be afraid of it because, now my husband or now my wife is going to start looking better to other people. You know what I mean? And so they resist that person's change and they're not really supportive. And that could make or break somebody's ability to, make that big change. So who you are around is, I think, very important. But, even just those little things, like you said, like, are you, do you come home and sit in front of the TV for 4 hours and then tell everybody, I don't have any time to work out? There's no time in my, and it's like, well, did you watch 2 hours of television last night? Like, you could have done something else with that time. And it's, it's being aware and honest, I think, with yourself, and having a willingness to change. Like, I'm not suggesting you get a divorce so that you can go do a transformation, but controlling those things that you can, control, right? Are you watching too much television? Do you, at work, does somebody bring donuts every day? Are they in the copy room? Do you go in the copy room every day and then you can't resist the donuts? You know what I mean? Like making those changes, like, okay, I know the donuts will be out there from 8 to 12. Don't go into the copy room if, that's your downfall. It's about, making those changes that you can make, but you have to be honest. You know what I mean? And I think that's the most difficult thing that people have is just being honest with themselves, like you'll say, okay, I'm going to go make my copies now. I know the donuts are going to be in there, but I'm not going to eat any. And you walk out with a glazed donut. So work around those, those obstacles the best that you can.
What's your thoughts on optimal workouts for building muscle? I quite a lot of your channel, you talk about all body training or all body workouts. Like, do you if specifically in terms of building muscle, like, are you a whole body a day? Are you individual muscle groups, one or two per day? Like, where do you sit on that? And have you I know earlier we sort of talked about, well, it depends on the individual, but is there anything that you found is a good, again, another good rule of thumb to follow when it comes to, how to train?
Yeah, so there's two main ways to train. One is like a full body program where you come in and do exercises for most major muscle groups. You're going to do some bench press, you're going to do some squats, you're going to do some back pull downs, maybe, right? You're hitting the majority of the muscle groups. Then you have your split. And a lot of people call it a bro split or a bodybuilding split, right? Where you may do, chest and triceps one day and shoulders and back the next day and then legs, right? And that allows you to do more volume for each muscle group. Because if you did, if we're talking back to like Arnold doing 20 sets for chest, if he did a full body workout, he'd be in the gym the entire day, 20 sets for chest and 20 sets for back. And it'd be impossible to do. You'd be wiped, right? So the split allows you to focus on muscle groups and use more volume. However, arguably the better way to train an athlete, right? Not a bodybuilder, although they're an athlete, they're not really a functioning athlete. It's more how they look and posing. Whereas if you're building an NFL player, you're probably better off training the whole body, right? Versus having them come in and train just their chest. They're never going to be just using their chest on the field, It's going to be legs and chest at the same time, like for alignment, right? So your better bet is to train full body. Now, the debate that's going on with all these fitness influencers is what's better for the average person, for building muscle. And what the research is showing is full body is better for fat loss. It helps with fat loss because you think about it. If you go in the gym and you train your chest and your back and your shoulders and your legs all in one workout, now all those muscle groups, even though you did less total work for each muscle group than a split, have to recover to some capacity. And so recovery is a calorie burning process, right? And so you have more recovery, more muscles that need to be, and more calories that you're burning versus if I just came in and did chest, right? Even though I'm probably using some triceps and whatnot, I really didn't do anything for legs, right? So maybe only half my body is recovering now. So you're probably going to burn fewer calories after that workout is over, right? As far as muscle growth goes, again, we get back to what the hell grows muscle, There are some people who claim that more frequent workouts is important for building muscle. And some who say, well, a longer rest period is longer for muscle. And then you have bodybuilders who train each muscle group once a week. You have bodybuilders who train each muscle group twice per week. You have bodybuilders who train each muscle group 3 times per week, which is probably what you would do with a full body, maybe 3 workouts with a day off in between, 3 times per week. What grows more muscle? It's really hard to say. We don't know. Fat loss, I think we can say full body. As far as hypertrophy, it's really hard to say whether training more frequently with like a full body versus more of a split where you're getting more rest periods or longer rest period between workouts for that muscle group would be more beneficial.
With, let's say, bang for the buck exercises, I know there's a bunch of people talking on YouTube at the moment about exercises that trigger a rise in testosterone levels. Now, based on what we spoke earlier, is there any relevance of raising testosterone levels if you want to build muscle? But for the sake of this question, are there exercises like squats or deadlifts that do trigger that? And then we can come on to, is it worth triggering in the first place?
Yeah. So obviously exercises that use larger muscle groups, squats, right? Legs, right? It's half your entire body, right? Will stimulate more growth hormone, more testosterone, right? Now, growth hormone in particular, we don't really know, is that worth anything, because they've done workouts where they've specifically changed the workout by instead of doing the set to failure, you stop halfway, right? You do the same rep range, but you stop halfway so that you're not reaching muscle failure, get a rest, and then continue the reps. And that is shown to to limit the rise in growth hormone you get.
Okay.
However, the results between the two training groups as far as muscle growth were no different, despite blunting growth hormone. So how critical is our hormonal response? We really don't know. And I mean, like, think about, have you ever seen a woman who, probably doesn't go to the gym, is probably overweight, but has like 20-inch calves? And I'm talking about not like just big
Flex
bulky,
Lewis
like
calves.
literally they're like veiny. You can see the medial head, of the gastroc, literally, and they're bigger than Mr. Olympia's calves on a female, on a woman, right? And so when you see that, and oftentimes you'll see women with even quads that are just like, and she doesn't go to the gym, and you're just like, how does that woman's lower body have so much muscle and lean muscle? And you're like, what's her testosterone? No, like nothing in a female. So how critical is testosterone for muscle growth if that female can build muscle like that, right? And so we don't know. However, obviously, uh, Mr. Olympia level bodybuilder is injecting a lot of testosterone, and testosterone analogs that are clearly helping him grow massive amounts of muscle, right? And so you sort of look at both these ends of the spectrum, Here's a woman with giant calves, bigger than this guy who's taking 20 different drugs, right? Massive calves. 20 where, and some guys can't even build their calves no matter how much testosterone, right? There's a genetic factor, So how critical is it? I don't know.
Is that because we're still learning about how those things interplay with each other and provide some kind of result? Is that
for sure?
Right.
Yeah. There's so many things we just don't know.
Right. Okay.
We have a lot of theories, right? Well, sure, steroids work. So testosterone is important for muscle growth, but tell me how she grew those calves and legs without barely any testosterone,
What are you, there's a couple of supplements that are fairly popular now or being talked about quite a bit. One of them is Xiaojit, and the other one is Tonga Ali. Like, what are your thoughts on both of those? Do they only work if your testosterone's low? And again, we're coming back to this testosterone question now, which is sort of, what are they worth taking if people are clearly taking them to have some sort of muscle or strength benefit from those supplements?
Yeah, I mean, I use both of those in my new testosterone formula, Shilajit and Tonka, also known as Uricoma longifolia. And both seem to be very effective for increasing testosterone, probably somewhere in the 10 to 40% range in increase.
Which is quite a bit, is it? It sounds like a lot.
Yeah, 40% is getting there. 10% isn't, if it's 10%, that means if you were 500, you're 550. You know what I mean? Like, that's not really going to make a huge difference. But if you're talking like 50%, that's from 500 to 750, right? That's going to be a difference. And so I use those ingredients. However, I would not, like I said, recommend taking them. And again, not trying to promote my supplement line here. I just want to talk about ingredients, but each, like I said, you may get a 10%, 20%, 30% raise from each those individuals. But what I've done in that Alpha Gym and Alpha Gym X, which is the new one, is I've combined all these ingredients at the doses that were studied, right? And so now you're getting fenugreek, you're getting Uricoma or the Tonkat Ali at the proper dose. You're getting Shilajit at the proper dose. You're getting ashwagandha at the proper dose for testosterone. Now, with all those little 10% and 20%, they add up. People are literally doubling and tripling their testosterone with those ingredients in combination. And so that's when you get a decent boost, not a, like I said, 10% boost. Sure, it's helpful, but I don't think you're really going to notice that. Whereas you're getting a 50% or a 100% boost, a doubling of your testosterone, that's when you start feeling it and noticing the difference.
With the combination of those, like it sounds like there's so many variables when you're combining things. How do you, like logically, it makes sense to say, all right, well, if I add these together and package them up, that's going to work. But how do you, when you're developing these formulas, know that some of them don't necessarily counteract or impact things in a slightly different way by putting them all together?
You don't. But what I work with is I work with things that have been studied, right? So we know that they produce an effect. But then what is the mechanism? And so what I look for is ingredients that go by different mechanisms.
What do you mean by mechanisms?
Well, there's different ways to increase testosterone. One is to increase the conversion of cholesterol, which is the starting material for testosterone, into testosterone. Another way is to prevent the testosterone that's already made from being reduced into estrogen or DHT, dihydrotestosterone, right? And then you can also increase testosterone from the adrenal glands with DHEA. And so using things that use different mechanisms will help to create an additive effect versus using multiple ingredients that all work on the same
way. Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You're only going to activate the conversion of cholesterol into testosterone by so much, right? So if you've got one or two ingredients that do that, do you need a third or a fourth one? No, you should probably be focusing on ingredients that reduce the reduction of testosterone, right? Ones that increase more free testosterone, right, which is the active form of testosterone. One that's going to increase DHEA, and use DHEA, which is another pathway to produce testosterone. And that's why the alpha gym is. And then I test it before we sell it, right?
What's the difference between free testosterone and what's the other one called?
Total. So you have total, right? You measure your total. And so your total is bound to a protein. Okay. Which carries it in the blood. But when it's bound to that protein, it can't enter like the muscle cell until it's free from that. So we measure both total testosterone and then free testosterone. The free is, again, there's a lot of questions still. The free is believed to be the one that's going to go in to the muscle, right?
So could you have
then you have studies, where testosterone went down in the blood, but it's like, well, maybe it went down because it's in the muscle now. You see? It's really not a decrease. You see?
Yeah. Because I was thinking, like, could you have low testosterone but more free, and sort of still be better off than someone has high testosterone?
Potentially, yes, but typically they go sort of hand in hand.
Okay, right, makes sense. What's there? I was listening to some stuff. I listened to quite a lot before I came here, but one of the things I heard you talking about was anabolic and androgenic ratios in supplements and why that is relevant or not to someone like me.
Yeah. So with supplements, there's not really with steroids. Okay, there's steroids that are more anabolic and there's steroids that are more androgenic, right? The anabolic is going to give you the muscle building, right?
Right.
Fat loss. The androgenic is going to give you sex drive, anger, male pattern baldness, right? That's androgenic effects. So a bodybuilder is interested in building muscle. So they want steroids that are more anabolic than androgenic, which is why tren is have you heard of tren? You know, that's everybody's talking about tren these days, right? It's because it's very anabolic compared to straight up like testosterone cypionate, okay? Very anabolic. Should give you fewer side effects, should give you more muscle growth, right? However, you still get some androgenic effects because, most guys are taking loads of it. With supplements, it's less about anabolic and androgenic and more about increasing your testosterone, right? Total. Then what ingredients are going to prevent the reduction of testosterone to DHT, dihydrotestosterone, right? Which is your androgenic form of testosterone, right? So having those other ingredients that will help to lower the conversion of testosterone to DHT will be more anabolic because you're getting less androgenic DHT, right?
Right.
But there's not really like, oh, fenugreek is more anabolic, whereas ashwagandha is more androgenic. It doesn't work like that
Okay.
with supplements,
Do,
right?
do you have, so with that example though, like some build muscle, some increase sex drive, and what was the other thing? So if you look at those two sides, like can you take, like, for example, your testosterone replacement supplement and that builds muscle, but on the opposite side, is it sort of pushing some of the other things down, like sex drive, so you're kind of a little bit unbalanced, or do they balance you out fairly?
Yeah, I mean, the ingredients profile that I have does balance out very nicely. In fact, most people report less aggression and mood swings,
Right, yeah.
but more sex drive.
Okay. And the ones, if you go back to steroids for a second, just to kind of help me get my head around it. So in the steroid category, you have some steroids that build your muscle and make you aggressive, and then other steroids that work on your sex drive. And if you sort of just take one of them, you could decrease things like sex drive but build muscle,
For
or
sure.
increase sex drive and not have muscle.
Definitely.
Right. So there's a big balance. And
Definitely, yes.
Okay,
There
right.
are many bodybuilders, depending on what drugs they're taking, who are either have a raging libido or have no sex drive, just based on switching up their
Right.
drugs.
Okay. And then if you drop that down into the supplement world, it's not quite as
It's not quite as black and white like that.
right. Okay. But are there any considerations? So if they don't get your testosterone replacement, like are some of the supplements out there, could you unknowingly be having ones that are sort of affecting, the wrong type of results?
Yeah, I would say potentially, yeah. But I think it's more, definitely, but I think it's more, is it even like raising your it's more like, is it doing anything for your testosterone, let alone androgenic or anabolic? Is it actually raising your testosterone,
Right. Okay.
at all?
Right. What about peptides? This is sort of a new one. Is what are they? Are they sort of like a new, better version of a like an anabolic steroid or testosterone? And if not, like what do they do? Why do people talk about them? Are they effective?
Yeah, I mean, the peptides are, health to, you can take peptides for digestion, like helps with your GI tract and whatnot. Or you could take peptides that'll help you build muscle.
What
right?
what are they then?
They're it's amino acids.
Okay.
So a protein is multiple amino acids. A peptide is a few, like 3, 4. Like a dipeptide would be 2 different amino acids. A tripeptide would be 3. But anyway, right? So with proteins, they're amino acids. They're functional proteins. As far as supplementing with them, I liken them to prohormones. So when prohormones were big, I would tell people, look,
What's a pro-hormone, by the way?
a prohormone is a version of testosterone that's not quite testosterone yet. DHEA, for example, is a prohormone because it's starter material for testosterone. It's one of the steps that goes from cholesterol to testosterone, right? So you give not testosterone, but a molecule that will in the body be converted into testosterone. That's a prohormone. So what was it? Mark McGuire, remember he was the baseball player who got busted for prohormones in his locker.
Oh, I didn't know.
And then that started the whole. Yeah. Anyway, so so people this goes back to the early 2000s when prohormones were big, 2005, 2006, and that's the question I would get all the time. Now I get the peptide question. But I would say, I personally, I wouldn't mess around with prohormones because they can also be converted into estrogen or DHT. So you don't really know which way they're going to go, right? Same thing with peptides. We don't know enough about them. They haven't been used for long enough. So you could be taking something that's supposed to help your digestive tract and end up, who knows, doing something else too, what else? And the anabolic ones are, even more questionable. So
Is that field, is it still a little bit underground? Like
yes,
it
very
is,
much.
right?
Yes. Yeah, it's very much in like the gray kind of area of, is it a supplement? Is it a drug? What is it
Right.
at this stage?
Okay. What are your thoughts on fasting, intermittent fasting for strength and muscle building? Are there benefits of or time restricted eating? Do any of those have benefits, or based on what you said before? If you're working out, you want to be refueling with protein, and so any kind of fasting or starvation for a period of time may actually sort of go against those strength and muscle gains.
So I love intermittent fasting. In fact, I do a bit of intermittent fasting, modified.
How do you do it?
So I typically do 12 hours of fasting as
Right.
my minimum.
Right.
I just want to get in 12. And that's what I recommend anybody who's interested to try intermittent fasting. Just start with 12. You're probably close there already. If you stop eating at 8 p.m. at night and you don't eat till 8 a.m. the next day, that's 12 hours, right? And so I like fasting for health and for fat loss. Now, there's some research that shows it may not be any more effective for fat loss than carb cycling or keto, right? Whatever the diet is, right? Both can be equally effective for fat loss. What I like about intermittent fasting for fat loss is this is something I studied at Yale. We looked at fasting. It increases what's called uncoupling proteins. And these are proteins that poke holes in mitochondria so that you burn more fat and carbs to get the same amount of energy. You're less efficient. You have to burn more. It's like, an engine, it produces so much heat and produces so much work, right? These uncoupling proteins make the mitochondria, which is part of our cells that make the real energy for us, ATP, right? So it just makes them less efficient. They produce more heat, less energy. So you have to burn more carbs and fat to get the same amount of energy. That's the one thing I like about them. The other thing I like about intermittent fasting is the mindset for somebody, right? So it depends, on the type of person you are. Like, let's say you're trying to watch what you eat, right? And you want to drop whatever, 15, 20 pounds. So you're trying to change your diet and you want to lower your carb intake as your way. You're going to do some carb cycling. And today's your super low carb day. You can only have 50 grams of carbs. Every morning you go to Starbucks and get a black coffee. But today you're standing there, the line's really long, and you're standing there and that pumpkin bread is staring you in the face. And you're just like, my God, I love that pumpkin bread, right? If you're on a regular diet, you're going to be like, okay, if I get the pumpkin bread now, I won't eat pasta for dinner. Okay. And so you're making like these constant, like,
Negotiations.
negotiations all day long about, whereas if you're not eating until 2 p.m. because you're intermittent fasting and you walk into Starbucks at 8 a.m. to get your black coffee and you see that pumpkin bread, you're going to be like, wow, that looks really good. No, it's not my time to eat
Not an
yet.
option. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it makes it easier for a lot of people, they
Mhm.
find.
Mhm.
It's like a mindset. It's like,
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
and so that's one of the reasons why I like it. Now, for building muscle, it sucks. There's
Really?
not a Mr. Olympia competitor. I'm not even talking about winners, competitors. They're probably not even a pro bodybuilder that does intermittent fasting, because those periods of not eating, what's happening to the muscle? You're breaking down your muscle. Now, a normal person, when they eat again, will rebuild those amino acids that were lost. But if you're someone who's trying to build muscle, You don't want to lose it to then just try to build it back and try to now build more.
So what are you doing? Because if you said you do 12 hours, like clearly you've got, at your age, you've got, you're holding a lot of muscle. Like, do you on that first meal get quite a lot of protein to sort of kick that back off again, or
Yeah. So one of the things that we studied, and this is back in the lab I was in at Yale School of Medicine, is we looked at what happens, and we did some human stuff, but in rats as well. What happens when you fast and then have a high carb meal or a high protein meal? Is there a difference, right? And so what we found was when you had the high protein meal, it boosted the calorie burn even further that you got from the fasting.
Oh.
When you had the high carb meal, it basically stopped it. So I typically recommend, and again, like you've done the fasting, doesn't really matter which meal you have after the fast, right? You've gone through the fast, just eat, right? But for somebody who really wants to maximize fat loss, right, I would recommend having a high protein, low carb meal as your first meal after the fast. And again, we're getting into the nitty gritty here, right? But it may help extend the amount of calories you're burning from the fasting.
Yeah, I like that idea. Like I do 16-8, and I
that's the typical, right?
And I interviewed someone, and then I've just like for me it's habitual. I just, like you said, it's like, look, even though I want to eat maybe later in the evening or early in the morning, I'm like, look, that's when I eat. And then when you do eat, you're like, okay, well, I need my first meal, which I want to have, like you said, the protein. So you kind of focused on that, and then you fall for a while.
Yeah.
And then you have another meal, and then you're starting to come to the end of your window. And then, so it seems to kind of direct you into sort of like more positive behavior, because you kind of pretty much full most of the time.
Yeah.
In some cases, I'm like, I have, my wife does me like a sort of a bunch of meat or a steak thing, and I'm like, I can't eat anything, It's like finishing it a little bit earlier.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I want to go on to recovery as we sort of wrap up, and clearly, recovering from workouts is important, and it's a bit of an industry buzzword now where everybody's talking about different types of recovery. One of the bits of research I saw, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it says new research suggests low intensity cardio after resistance training can enhance recovery. Do you know anything about that? And if so, how effective is that approach compared to other forms of recovery?
Yeah, so there's also a study that found that people who are too sedentary, these are people who exercise, right? But the rest of the day, they're very sedentary, don't recover as well as people who are more active. And, this made me think of myself as a teenager when I was a bodybuilder, particularly on leg days, which were usually on Sunday. I would go train legs at the gym, like kill ourselves. And my training partner and I mean, this is back before we knew much about nutrition, but we would, load up on, like burgers and just sit and watch football all day. And the concept was, I'm not going to move because I just did this crazy workout. Now I'm just going to sit here and recover I don't want to move. I want to expend as few calories as possible. And that may be the wrong way to recover. And I just did a video on this study, as a matter of fact. And my theory is that the greater activity increases blood flow. So when you're increasing blood flow to the recovering muscles, you're now delivering more oxygen, more nutrients, right? More hormones, and you have more blood flow going away from the muscle, which is carrying away waste products.
Interesting.
Which helps it recover by getting those waste products out. So yes.
You're moving fluids.
Yes. So doing some light cardio after you work out, I believe could help with recovery on that sort of, again, this isn't definitive answer. This is definitely why it's working, but that's my theory on why doing something like that, a little light cardio or just staying active instead of, I worked out hard, now I'm going to sit. I mean, that was literally when I was trying to, when I was trying to get to 300 pounds, that was my whole goal in life, was to move as little as possible because I didn't want, I was a skinny kid. So trying to gain weight was not easy for me. So I would do as little activity as possible, thinking I'm going to build more muscle because I'm burning fewer calories. And now those calories that I would have burned walking and are now going to go to refuel my muscle. And I probably needed more blood flow
That's
by
that sort
moving.
of that bro science type of.
Exactly.
um,
So yeah, that's an interesting one because,
Yeah.
like I said, I covered something similar, but it was just total like daily activity.
Mhm.
Those that were more sedentary did not recover as well. They had higher creatine kinase and myoglobin levels in the blood for like 72 hours after their myoglobin and creatine kinase levels, which are markers of muscle damage, were higher up to 72 hours after in those who did less activity.
Interesting. Well, that's very cool. Alcohol, and I know, you're someone who likes to have a life in balance and
Yes.
doesn't sort of, eats donuts and stuff. But in general, what are your sort of thoughts or experience on alcohol and muscle building? Is it something that you kind of want to try and avoid? Does it, I've been wearing one of these Oura rings and I can clearly see that my ability to sleep well after alcohol is very different to if I don't have
for
it.
sure. Yeah. Especially as you get older. Alcohol is just horrible as you get older. it just ruins your, sleep quality. It impairs your sleep, your sleep cycle for sure. It definitely, a lot of people think, oh, it's going to knock me out. Yeah, it'll knock you out, but you'll probably wake up in like 3 hours and won't be able to go back to bed. Yeah, often have that.
Yeah. I'm out for 2 or 3 hours,
Yeah.
and then
You wake up and then you're like, what? Well, why am I awake? So it does disrupt sleep patterns. As far as building muscle, unless you're an alcoholic, unless you're, drinking 5-6 drinks a day, a little alcohol in moderation. Like I said, I'm all about balance and enjoying life. So if that's something you enjoy, then in moderation, absolutely, absolutely fine. However, like I said, it will disrupt your sleep quality. It causes inflammation in the body. We know that. It's definitely not a great thing. Remember when it used to be like, oh, 2 glasses of wine is better for, and now we're like, not really.
Yeah.
So I'm like, look, if you like to drink in moderation, I feel that's completely fine. Like I said, as long as you're not drinking every night and your sleep patterns are disrupted every single night, but in moderation, like enjoy it. You gotta enjoy yourself.
You're someone that's creating or have created different compounds for different results from a physical perspective. Have you given some thought to that alcohol question? Because there's no doubt that sometimes, particularly at a weekend, you've had a tough week, having a glass of wine or a cocktail kind of takes the edge off things and sort of brings you down. But I certainly know if I go and have, go and have a cup, 2 or 3 margaritas, the next day I'm just not exactly as alive as what I would. And also as I get older, like you say, it tends to hit me harder.
Yep.
It seems to.
I hear that from a lot of people.
Have you thought about
and agreeing personally as well? So.
Have you thought about there being a healthier way of doing it? Because certainly now, and being in California, there's all kinds of different, there's the sort of cannabis kind of world. There's now different types of mushrooms that do this. Have you given any thought to a healthy cocktail that has the sort of balancing and relaxing effects, but allows you to get up in the morning and have a great workout without being, feeling crap?
Yeah, ashwagandha and L-theanine.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something you sell as a product, or you just combine it yourself?
I actually include it in my hydration formula for that sort of stress relief, keeping the stress down. But again, it's easy to find as single supplements and take about 100 to 200 milligrams of the L-theanine. And then on the ashwagandha, it also boosts testosterone. I go up to about 1,200 milligrams per day, but for relaxation, you're good with like 200 to 400 milligrams.
Mm. What do you think about the CBDs that's around? I listened to Huberman talk about it, and they seem to sort of say that there's nothing really in it. You know, the amounts that you've got to take are so high to get any response. And so, you know, where the talk is about it reducing inflammation and assisting with recovery, it may not be, you know, all that. Do you have any views on that
Yeah, I
product?
mean, it's still like it's one of those kind of like peptides, and it's in that gray area, you know. Um, as a matter of fact, we had a brand come to us. There was a CBD brand wanting to partner with us a few years ago on, supplements with using CBD for, like you said, recovery and that sort of thing, stress relief. And I decided no, because it's just too gray of an area. You know what I mean? As far as what the legality is of it. You know what I mean? Is it pot? Is it, you know, what is it? And so I decided not to go down that route. And again, like, is it something that I recommend? There's still so little that we know about it. So I'm not a huge proponent.
No.
No.
I was at,
I mean, if you want, like, I'm not, again, the weed is legal in California. I'm not saying that I've never had a weekend enjoying THC or CBD. Um, but I'm saying, as far as something that you should be doing like after workouts daily, I would say no.
no. I was at a fitness show earlier this year, and there was a few people talking about kratom for
Yeah, right,
workouts.
yes.
And when I went out and sort of it was packaged as being really good for workouts, and you have a little bit before your workout, it helps you think clearer. But when I went online and saw, you know, some other versions, like kratom seemed to be this kind of hard alternative to almost like opiates. What are you seeing? Why is kratom, do you think, suddenly become popular in the sort of health and fitness side of things? And you know, is it a bad thing, or is it sort of healthy depending on how you take it?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know that much about it. I've never actually tried it myself. But again, like I said, it's kind of, for me, it's like CBD. It's kind of like that gray area. We don't know. What is that? There's something they sell. It's like a drink that's kratom, and it's called like Be Free or something. What is the other ingredient? Kratom and kava. And kava is a very effective supplement for stress relief. It may have some toxic issues for the liver, taking too much. But I've used kava as a chew. Have you ever seen you can actually buy it. Like, it's actually the kava just ground up, and you literally have it like chaw. It'll make your mouth numb, but it's very, very relaxing. So yeah, there's a I think it's called Be Free, where it's kava and kratom for that, that stress, makes you feel relaxed, which can help with recovery, help you sleep better. But again, like I said, I'm, you know, as a supplement manufacturer, I always have to be on the up and up as far as, being compliant and legal. And so I really don't waste my time with those types of ingredients, because like I said, they're in
Mhm.
that gray area. So
Yeah. My final question then, Jim, it was pre-pandemic since we last met, and I know you've been through a lot of different things since then. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you believed is impossible and gone on to make possible. Since we last spoke, what would be a memorable example of where you've had to escape your own personal limits?
hmm, that's a great question. I'm sure there's one. I'm blank. I mean, you know, um, the reason you're interviewing me is because, I've accomplished a few things in life. But the reason I've accomplished a few things in life is because, I try not to have many limits, right? And so, I'm not trying to claim I, I have the perfect life. Everything's perfect. There's, I have absolutely no limits. But I think compared to the average person, there's probably fewer things that I need to fix as far as limits go.
Have you got to a stage in your life and career where you're um, at a place where you thought you would be now, or wanted, yeah, aimed that you would be?
Yeah, I mean, look at this gym. As I walk in here every day, and feel very fortunate. As a kid, I would train in my basement and think that one day, you know, I never would have believed that I would have a place, like this to my own, to be able to train in and shoot and shoot in. And so, you know, it, I feel very, very fortunate. I'm trying to think. I'd probably say my legs is probably the hardest thing, because when I came up training, a lot of judges at bodybuilding contests would tell me I needed to bring my upper body to meet my legs because I was you know, I could front squat with 6 plates on each side on the barbell, for reps. I loved squatting, loved training legs. And in fact, most bodybuilders, real hardcore bodybuilders, their favorite leg day and the day they hate the most is legs. It's a challenge, but the ones that love it, love to have that challenge. And so I think the hardest thing for me now is like I can't I'll never squat 405 pounds again or deadlift, 600 something pounds ever, and so I've had to adjust my training around that and just, my life. I can't run. Like the legs are so impaired that I can't run, I can't jump. Um, and I've issues still going downstairs, because each leg I re-injured during the healing process. I retore them.
Yeah.
And so each one had to have multiple surgeries. So it's not just a simple reattachment. And so the biomechanics are just, off. And so I haven't been able to heal 100% from those surgeries and sort of do what I do, like there's a lot of exercises I I can't demonstrate. I physically can't do it, in certain leg exercises. And so I think, getting over that, but I would say, a lot of people would think that that would be detrimental and put somebody like me into like a deep depression, but it's a learning experience, In fact, when I injured the leg, I remember it was in Portland. I was trying to jump over this um like drain. They have like, in the middle of Portland they have these little canals for drainage, and we were just trying to get to a restaurant, and we parked and there was a canal. We could either walk all the way around or we could. So I'm like, I love jumping things like that, and so I went to jump it, and as I jumped, the quad blew out on takeoff, not on landing,
Oh,
on the takeoff. It blew out. And as I'm in midair, I thought I got shot because all of a sudden it's just like this explosion in my leg. And I couldn't figure out what had happened, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to land. And this is kind of in slow motion now. And I had to clear this, thing, and there was a park bench. So I also had to clear the park bench originally, right? Which normally I would be able to do, but with your quad blown out. So I'm like, how am I going to land? And I'm not clearing this park bench. And so I literally like landed on the park bench and then like flipped over, and I'm lying on the ground and my kneecap is literally up at my hip, right? And I'm lying there in agony, right? And the first thing on my mind is like, wow, I'm going to learn a lot about training.
what am I going to do? A squat still?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to have to really adapt my training. This is going to be an interesting learning experience. That was literally the first thought in my mind is like, this is going to be really an interesting experience. I'm going to learn something out of this versus, oh no,
Yeah.
what am I going to do? My life is over. And,
That's a good mindset.
I tried to show my audience that despite this injury, that I can still move all of this. So if you think I'm sitting around and being depressed that I tore my quad and I'm not going to be able to squat. No, I'm coming in here and exercising. So I think that's probably the closest thing about escaping, my limits is, now that I can't do all this, and I would do these, crazy long jump, crazy, high jumps. I love to be athletic. I ride a unicycle. I've like adult pogo sticks, motorcycles. I can't even ride the motorcycle now because I'm afraid that if I, when I stop at a stop sign, if I put the leg down, sometimes it just gives out. Like I take a step and the muscles don't know how to synchronize, I think is what's going on, just for like a microsecond. When I'm walking, that's fine. But if I'm trying to hold up a 1,000-pound motorcycle, it's a little different. So, getting through all that was pretty interesting, but a lot easier than I would have thought. Somebody who athleticism means so much to not be able to go sprint or chase my kid, you know what I mean? Or get on my motorcycle or jump or, you know what I mean? Ride a unicycle. But, there's other things in life. There's so many other things in life. So, and everything is a learning experience. I think that's what really helped me get through that is like what I learned about myself and then what I could teach others about that experience really helped me get through that.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for your time today. I
are you
appreciate it. It was
kidding?
wonderful.
As always, love it.